This video is for Joachim. I'm going to attempt now to render some kind of reaction to Marco's recent article in the Vogtland View, linked below. Joachim seemed interested. I was going to read it, but I was going to read it on YouTube, but it was so long that that I kind of lost steam, and I read the second half of it silently, and then I just thought better of posting my recording somehow. But what you say? Marco has written a wonderful article, a wonderful piece on returning. So this is just my take on kind of a return to medieval wisdom on the one hand, a return to the pagan roots of the philosophic life, of the Socratic life, and from a Christian point of view, recapturing that fundamental root of the pagan, and from what I can make out, not allowing the excesses and super fluidities, superfluousnesses of Christianity to extend beyond the point of being properly grounded in the philosophical life. I was somewhat consoled by Marco's statements about poetry, the role of poetry being the purification of the passions, and the being, I forget the word he used, but more or less leading to the life of philosophy, and thus the life of the good, of God. Poetry being the expression of passions, modifying passion to purify passion. Seems to me a pretty good, pretty adequate summation, encapsulation of the poetic, and runs such a encapsulation, such a description runs counter to received assumptions about the poetic as somehow, for the sake of passion, in and of itself, the mere expression of passion being a good in and of itself, rather than, as Marco just put it, as I just put Marco putting it, having to do with this kind of path of purity. And just see if I can. It's been a couple days since I read the article, but I'm gonna test my powers of remembrance by trying to dredge up what I recall by reading. you know, Marco is kind of at war with modernity, rightfully so, I acclaim. Um, Modernity being a kind of tumor, outgrowth, um, tumeric outgrowth of Christendom originally, the age of exploration, the age of technological, industrial development, man as conqueror, as conquistador of all the planes of Earth, seeking to subdue nature rather than to harmonize with it, something perhaps like that. And the destruction of poetry in the modern setting, not just in a formal sense, but the degradation of language, of how people speak, how people thus think, the coarsening of our linguistic faculties over all and over a large, long span of time. Having to do with a broader abandon and betrayal of the core root of goodness, of what is good in the project of Western civilization, or of humanity's quest to seek the divine in general. I'm not quite sure if nuances are being lost by me in simply doing a recap like this. But in any case, Marco talks about the sin of treachery, of betrayal, as being at the bottom of Dante's Inferno for a reason, and treachery, more than pride, is the topmost sin of man, the topmost thing, because one might say perhaps that pride at least can cloak itself in not knowing, but the thing about a character like Judas Iscariot, for instance, is that he cast out demons and saw miracles with his naked eyes, and so too the betrayal of us as a civilization collectively against our higher ends is a kind of similar betrayal, since we in the West at least have some recollection, be it dimming, of what was good, of what was worth saving, worth pursuing, worth spreading the light of reason properly ordered, rather than reason as techne, as mere tool of man to purvey all the excesses of modernity. So what this makes me think of is my parents and the kind of Christianity I was raised in, which partakes in in Marco's words, kind of this implied Kantian dialectic that Marco says at one point in that article, that even though most people have not read Kant, it is as if we have all read Kant. Similar to how, we have all kind of read Freud, even if we haven't literally read him. There are consequences of such modes of thought which by osmosis traverse all lines of society and structure our systems of morality and ethics. The core point about Kant being that the reason somehow through its own powers can establish a fixed bound where reason can no longer settle certain matters. Kant being famous for his antinomies, these dual questions, as did time begin at a certain moment, or do we live in an infinite expanse of time? How could time begin if such a beginning did not take place also in time? And yet, if time did not begin, then from where are we counting? Or these kind of imponderables, these kinds of conundrums, leading Kant up to a kind of last will and testament about the divine, that the divine is this, as far as I understand it, in this kind of noumenal space that cannot be approached by mere reason, letting us off the hook, as it were, of any more anciently grounded quest in the Socratic vein for the ideals of good and of God. Returning to what I felt compelled a moment ago to say, that kind of Protestantism I was raised in, or the kind of verbiage and rhetoric I still hear from the mouths of Christians, I sense that Marco is raising some objection, counter the typical kind of Lutheran pastor or something who makes appeals to Christianity as a kind of Deus ex machina, as a kind of full stop at the end of the sentence, that everything has been said in the New Testament, for instance, or by St. Paul, that the last word on the bondage of will or something like that has been spoken, and thus far and no farther. It's, in my opinion, such rhetoric is a kind of prop, a way of propping up um, the unease, the anxiety um, of man in his confrontation with the universe writ large. It's a kind of a way of similar to Kant of establishing this outer periphery, this bound, as if such a bound could ever be fully fully positioned and buttressed, such that we had some blessed reassurance that we were in the good already, and had no need for a heroic struggle to access, to come to terms with the beyond, with the beyond. It's, this hubris of modernity, a la Kant, a la Luther, a la Freud. Modernity being characterized above all by these various attempts to siphon and circumnavigate all truth, or all accessible truth, into a kind of into a playpen of the marketplace, where then angels and demons cohabit the same coffee shops and delis to get their sweet treats and sweet meats. Something a little like that. Whereas the Christianity more philosophically pursued, or more Christianity better pursuing that end, in fact does not involve the setting of such bounds to reassure us, like the walls of an enclosure, but pierces even up into the highest heavens for the true pilgrim, the true penitent, who seeks an encounter beyond. So in any case, poetry as expression of man's passion, of passion modifying passion to purify passion, leading to the life of philosophy in the pagan or Socratic vein, which seeks to orient reason, not to put an end to reasoning, but to launch further into the depths of reason not being an end point, but a kind of infinite expanse, like the field of mathematics or physics or something like that. Reason itself, although there may seem to be an atomic layer, chemically speaking, or a quadratic equation, mathematically speaking, in both fields of mathematics and physics, if one dives deep enough, one learns that in the nooks and crannies of such fields of exploration, there are always further recesses, secret recesses that can can be more and more understood unto infinity and beyond. And likewise with the life of reason, directed at the good life, at God. The foolish man is the one who does not fear God, who does not reckon, does not contemplate the infinity of such skies, such horizons. And so being open to God is like being open to the infinities of science and other branches of reason. Is a posture, an attitude of receptivity to that which is unknown, to not presume knowledge or seek total knowledge, which leads to, in the end, in the political sphere, to tyranny, but to remain in this kind of open posture, this receptive posture, which makes one a servant of truth rather than seeking to be the master of truth. The activity of grasping is that which weighs us down, and to fly light as a feather, lighter than an eagle, a wing, is to become weightless in a kind of acknowledgement of our own emptiness, our own lack, to have the light of reason, the light of the good, the light of God, of Christ, to shine through us like a cleansed glass. And not to presume to have, in any sense at all, even by way of humility, to have encapsulated the message like some soothing drumbeat of our own desire and will, which leads us to purgation, or even to sins of pride and treachery, when we hope to, in our own being, as if we had being at all in ourselves and did not rather partake of being, as if we could take the good and acquire it as to our own credit, even in acts of seeming, in the semblance of humility. I'm now tempted to say one final thing about poetry and language, that that I personally subscribe to the notion of that language is based on some kind of embodied cognition, that all language is learned through the body. In other words, the basic, the rudimentary component parts of language. One thinks, basic words like in, out, at, on, of, are these kinds of quarks and gluons of language, which have a directional energy, which are formed kind of out of these almost like Platonic shapes and surfaces, forms, up, down, um, aside these, or even, then you get into words like higher and better, and even a whole host and myriad of common phrases and descriptive turns of phrase, which are the basic kind of Lego blocks of how we convey the our inner reflections to the outer world, and poetry being in some considerable measure the adorning of thought, or the adorning of our language, to pay due respect to that ground, that foundation of that sort of embodied, incarnated way in which language is formed in all of us in childhood, in poetry, to take the passions which roil and rock the body, and to put them into linguistic forms which convey that roiling and rocking and spinning and whirling, or whatever, to drill past the frozen crust of linguistic earth into the smooth and gravy, oily bedrock. To recapture language more beautifully and more simply expressed, when our uses of language in the workaday, lug-a-day world are so drearily encumbered at all times with the need for utilitarian purposes to convey abstract matters of detail, and of law, to return to the dance of the tongue upon the palate, to return to the sense, the felt sense in which language, like music, simply flows out of our direct experience of whatever life may have us to experience. And this being a purification process, insofar as we don't seek refuge in poetry simply, but through the activity of poetry, as in a mirror glass, can see our better and our worser aspects portrayed more fully, for contemplation, for review, for navigation, and presentation to others for the same. I feel like there's one more thing. There's one tiny little addition I wanted to make. Maybe I'll just say that it seems the task of language is, in a sense, to unlearn language, bad language. The task of philosophy is to unlearn bad philosophy. The task of religion is to unlearn bad religion, inadequately framed and encased language, philosophy, religion. And I often think about the story of development of the science of crystallography. Crystallography was considered to be a completely solved science around the turn of the 20th century until it was found that there were crystalline patterns existing through meteorites and geometrically, Sir Arthur Penrose's Penrose tile showing these impossible symmetries, these aperiodic tilings of the plane, or one thinks of quantum physics disrupting Newton or something like that. That likewise with the life of philosophy, the life of poetry, the life of holiness, that the decrepit, despairing cry at the start of the modern age was the end of all such quests. The howl at the end of all such quests, and that really it's none of these things are over, none of these things are finished, none are solved, none ever can be fully solved, but only brought more and more still into our approach to eternity. That we are not intended to simply live in this physical world forever, but this world is a kind of a training ground, an incubation period for the supernatural life which follows this mortal coil, and that is the key and the lock of everything. Anyway, just leave it at that, I guess.